As you begin working in Photoshop, you will want to start paying attention to the image mode and the color mode that you are using with your images. And this will be dependent on what you're using the image for, whether you're using it for a screen or whether you're using it for print. Now, as you've seen before, we usually use a 300 pixels per inch bit depth for printing and a 72 pixels per inch bit depth for screen resolution. Now, the screen and the printer are going to handle color in different ways. For instance, on a screen, all the colors you see are made up with the RGB spectrum, that is red, green, and blue. So if we had a magnifying glass and we could zoom in on our screen or our television, we would actually see a bunch of little tiny red, green, and blue lights illuminating the screen that's making up all the colors that we actually see. And depending on which ones are on at which times, it mixes colors and we see the whole spectrum of colors on our screen. However, when you print, you use a different color system, which is the CMY or the CMYK color scheme. And that stands for cyan, magenta, and yellow, and the K stands for black. Now, you've seen this before if you've ever used a printer or an inkjet printer or maybe even a colored laser printer. Because whenever you load color into a printer, you don't use red, green, and blue, you use cyan, magenta, and yellow, and that's the way that things are printed. This is the same for something like screen printing. I used to have a screen printing business, and whenever we screen printed, we could use a mix of just cyan, magenta, and yellow and black and get every other color of the color spectrum. So let's go ahead and take a look at this and see why this is important and how we can adjust this and make changes. So the first thing we want to do is let me show you the colors so it makes a little more sense. If you go to Window, and I'm using the latest version of Adobe Photoshop CC 2018, if I go to Extensions, I can click on Adobe Color Themes, which is a great tool. I'll show you how to use it. And if you can't find that, you can try searching for it by looking up Find Extensions on Exchange. You don't need to open it because I'm going to show you everything right here, but if you want to follow along, you can click that. Now, this is a tool that allows us to quickly and easily pick different colors and color schemes and save those schemes out and just come up with a bunch of different ways of generating color. This is great for photography, graphic design, web design, all kinds of things. And you can see we have a color wheel here. We'll go over this in just a moment. If we click on the Explore tab, it'll actually show you some popular color themes on the Adobe site. And this is great if you're doing, like, say, a website and you can't figure out the colors you want to pick. You can come in here and find a great looking color scheme and use it. If you click on the three dots in that color scheme, you can edit the theme, you can add it to your favorites and use it. You can add it directly to your swatches so you can start pulling those colors in, and you can also view this color scheme online. There is also a tab for My Themes, so once you begin saving themes, you can have them in here ready to go and pull out your most common themes. So let's go back to the Create tab so that I can just give you a brief overview of what I'm talking about here. And you can see we have these colors already selected with these dots going out. I just want to get rid of those for a minute so it's a little easier to see. So I just turn that bottom slider down to black. And here we have a basic color wheel. Now we can look at the red, the green, and the blue on this color wheel, and you can see they all sit across from one another, making a sort of a triangle. If we look at the colors in between those, we actually see the cyan, the magenta, and the yellow. And so the screen is made up of the RGB color scheme, but can pull in colors like magenta and orange and yellows and cyans based on the way that it's mixing the colors. So in all actuality, green and red, viewed from a distance combined, can actually make a yellow looking color. And the same thing goes when you're using print. The cyan, magenta, and yellow can also make greens and blues and reds and oranges. Now, the hardest part is usually dealing with dark colors or black colors. Therefore, whenever you're using print, it usually can mix in a black color to get those darker, rich colors, where on a screen, you can just have the absence of color for the black. So these are your basic colors that you're going to be looking at and using, and you have to decide early on, what are you doing? Are you dealing with photographs? Are you printing those photographs? Or are you using those photographs on the web? And you'll just want to keep these in mind whenever you begin working. Now, each image is going to be labeled on what color mode that it's using. So if we look at this image and we look at its name, we're print.psd, we're at 66.7%, and we are at RGB, so the red, green, and blue color mode at 8 bits is our depth, color bit depth. Now, if we go up to the top and we click on image and we go to mode, we can see all of the color modes that we can choose here. Now, some of these are not highlighted based on the type of file that we're dealing with. So if we're dealing with a bitmap, that one would be lit up, but it's not. Same thing with duotone. But that's okay. I'll just show you the basics. So first we have grayscale, and changing this mode will actually get rid of all the color information and turn it into a grayscale image. We have index color, which will allow us to actually choose some of the settings that we want as far as the palette that we're using. So we can choose a web palette here, how many colors, how we're forcing blacks and whites and primaries and web colors, and then other options. We also have the RGB color, that is what is currently selected, and that's what this image is. Then we have the CMYK color, so you might need to change that if you're sending this off to a printer. We have lab color, which is a different way of composing colors, and then multi-channel mode for multiple channels, and I'll show you the channels here in a second. And then we have our different color bit depth. So this image is at 8 bits, we have 16 bits and 32 bits. Now keep in mind, you really can't go from a lower bit depth to a higher bit depth with making it look any better. There's not going to be much of a change. If you have a 32-bit image, you can bring it down to 8 bits to save on file size and what have you, but you can't take an 8-bit and adjust it up to 32 bits. It's going to try to calculate that, and it's not always going to really come out right. And you also need to keep in mind that whenever you're changing these colors, it's going to look different on your screen, because if we're using an RGB color picture and we change it to CMYK, the screen is still using an RGB mix, and so your colors might actually look a little different. So you need to make sure you're calibrating your monitor and you're checking your work whenever you're using print. You print it out and make sure it looks like you want it to look like. So let's just start with the RGB color, which is what this image already is. And if we go over to the layers panel, one of the panels I left open is called the channels panel. If we click on that, we can actually see the different channels that make up this image. You can sort of think of these like layers, except they don't get stacked. Each one of these combines to make your colors. And with RGB on, if I click on that, it actually isn't going to turn anything off, but I can start unclicking these channels, and when I do, you'll see the RGB go away. Now, it's always going to leave one channel active, and this is the blue channel. Even though it looks in grayscale and black and white, it's actually all the blue color information of this picture. Now, we can also click on another channel, such as the green, and it's going to be a mix of these two channels, and we actually see some color come in. So the green and blue is mixing, and you can see the blues, you can see the greens, and you can see everything in between, such as the cyan. If we get rid of the blue channel now, we can always have to leave one active. So this is the green color information, and then we can turn on red and green, and if you look on the color wheel, green and red make yellow. So now we can see yellow information, green information, and red information. And we can get rid of the green channel and just look at the red information displayed in grayscale here. And we can turn on red and blue, and that is going to make our magentas. So we can see blues, we can see reds, and we can see everything in between, including the magentas. So we can turn all of those on, and when we do, it turns the RGB channel back on, and all those colors mixed together, the blue channel, the green channel, and the red channel, make all the colors that you actually see in this photograph. So let's go ahead and change this to a CMYK mode, which would be the next one that you'll probably use often. And it's going to say you're about to convert to CMYK using this color profile. This may not be what you intend. To choose a different profile, use Edit, Convert to Profile. If you do Edit, Convert to Profile, there are a lot of different profiles to choose from based on the printer that you're using. So if you're having this printed out at a shop, they might give you a specific profile to use that will match their printer. So we're just going to hit OK. And we might not notice a big color difference shift. However, there is a shift that happens because we're translating everything from RGB to CMYK. And the same channels now pop up on the side. However, instead of them being red, green, and blue, we now have cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And we can do the same thing as before. So here's all the black information. So if we were to print out this for, say, a screen printer, this is what they would use for the black tones and the black ink. I would actually use this image right here to print all of my darks and blacks. And it would mix with, say, the yellows to give me the black and yellows, so we'd have light and dark areas with those yellows. Same thing with magenta. So there's our black and magenta channel, and there is our black and cyan channel. And then we also have, say, cyan and magenta. We can see those together. Magenta and yellow and cyan. And it makes up all that color information. So we'll just go ahead and turn all those back on. So you can actually adjust these channels however you want. You can create your own channels if you wanted to, your own cyan, magenta, yellow, and black channels. You can actually add in more channels. So as a screen printer, not only do I have the ability to use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, I can print any color. So maybe we wanted to use a green paint specifically to pull out the greens really nice and rich in our prints. We could add in a green channel here also. It's a little more advanced, but for right now, I just want you to understand how the different color modes work inside of Photoshop. Again, there are other modes that you may use as you get a little more advanced, such as the index, the lab colors, multi-channels, and so forth. But really, you're going to be mostly sticking to the RGB and the CMYK color. And throughout these tutorials, we'll probably just mostly use RGB since we won't be printing anything out. Everything will be on screen. The final one is the grayscale. You might also use this. This is just an easy way to discard color information and turn it into just a black and white image. If you wanted to print that out, that's a super easy way to create black and white images inside of Photoshop. Hopefully that gives you a good understanding of how color modes work and how the images processes color inside of Photoshop for either screen or print.